Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News. We are the news division of United Network, and we're also part of CARE, the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And our mission is to bring you the real news, and we do that in lots of different ways. We produce a lot of content. We release it throughout the week. That includes awesome stories and really on the ground, boots on the ground type stories from our field messengers. We have stories that the team and I work on for you guys that dive a little bit deeper into some of the headlines that you might be seeing out there. And we talk about the restoration of our planet. We also have updates from the Global Intelligence Agency. Kimberly Gogan is the head of the GIA, and she lets us know what's going on in what seems to be this very intense battle right now between good versus evil. And if you listen to mainstream media, you'll get one side of the story. It's a very 3D side of the story. But as many people have pointed out, this really is a spiritual battle. And yes, things are manifesting themselves on a 3D level, but this is existing in so many other realities. It's crazy. In fact, I might share a story with you guys a little bit later on about how reality is changing and how I'm starting to see these really strange glitches. And for me, it's just more proof of us being at the end of this battle. It's been a very long battle. I know a lot of you who are posting on our app and some of the forums that we have on Telegram, things like that, are sharing that, hey, you're ready for this to be over. And I think we all are. And we're at the end of this battle, which is good news for all of us. What you're listening to right now, this is a week in review podcast. So we take all the stories that we've released throughout the week, and I give you kind of a short Cliff Notes version. That's not to say that you shouldn't go back and watch, some of the content that we put out earlier this week, but it's a nice way to get caught up if you feel like you may have missed some of the stories, and also to share this with other people, because the content we put out there is available exclusively to our members. You can learn more about that at unitednetwork.earth. That's our website. So it's available exclusively to our members for the first week. And then we release it on YouTube and Rumble, but obviously we don't have control over whether or not YouTube and Rumble want to keep our stuff posted. So with anything that you guys are checking out, I know you guys have access to a lot of information. Always think critically, always ask questions. I say question everything. And when you figure some stuff out, share it with other people, because I really do believe that is how we're going to put all of these pieces together, and how this whole scenario that we all find ourselves in, that we agreed to be part of a long, long time ago, that's how this is all going to make sense. That's how we're going to get through it, is together. So let's go ahead and share those stories. Here's the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. Let's brag on our awesome field messengers for a moment, okay? Because we really do believe if we're going to change news, because so many people just have no faith in the news. I went to school for journalism. I worked at several television stations before getting out of that and starting to do more online work and podcasting. And, I'm glad I got out when I did, because most people have lost, their faith in the news. And for good reason, right? We are shown a lot of propaganda and we're expected to just believe it. And by the way, that's not just mainstream media, that's alternative media too. And they're very tricky, right, with the people that control media, because they know there's going to be some people that just don't believe the mainstream stuff. And that's really why alternative media was created. And so you really do have to use that discernment that's built in within you to know what is true for you, right? What makes the most sense and what really resonates with you. But we're counting on you guys to tell us what's going on in your community. We think that's the way we break down these stereotypes, these narratives that all news has been feeding us. We're all just kind of tired of it. So if you want to be part of the solution, visit our website, unitednetwork.earth. We have information up there about how to become a field messenger, and it's really just sharing what's going on in your community. We have these phones with incredible capabilities, so let's use them. Let's record some audio and video. You can send it to us. We have a production team that puts the stories together, and we're here to support you every step of the way. We have weekly meetings that you can attend if you're interested in, just connecting with other field messengers and sharing some ideas that you have for stories. We have a Telegram group that you can post stuff to. We have a bunch of stuff. So connect with us, and we would love to see you on a future call because we are committed to changing the face of news, as we usually say. And we need everyone, we need all hands on deck to do this. So let's show not really show, I guess we're just going to talk about them, right? You guys are going to have to visualize the show part. But I'm going to tell you about some of the stories we released this week. So kicking things off with Wayne in Arizona. So he is in an area where there's a lot of vacant businesses, and he drives through several areas in his car to show us these empty storefronts. And he's in the Tucson area, by the way. So it's a pretty big city. And his take on it, which I think is a very healthy, productive take, is that this is a lot of space that can be used for great things. So as we are beginning to restore our planet, there's a lot of infrastructure out there that's already built. And as these large corporations that did not have our best interest in mind, as they start to collapse, and we're already seeing that, Wayne is seeing it in Arizona, and I'm sure there's many other places where you're like, what happened to that business? What's going on there? These are not necessarily mom and pops, right? These are corporations that can no longer afford their rent because things are just not going their way. And so Wayne shows us what's going on in his area. He said there's also a lot of sheriff that are stationed outside of Walmarts, which I thought was interesting. Because you might think, oh, they're there for safety. But Walmart usually, unless things have changed, has their own security, like built-in security. But it appears that Walmart is still paying the sheriff's bills, paying them to sit outside of Walmart. That's going to be really interesting, to see how all of that plays out. I certainly don't feel bad for Walmart. All right, Akira from Japan shows us these beautiful plum blossoms that appear outside Tenjin shrines across Japan. It's drawing visitors right now. They're absolutely beautiful. It's like a white flower that starts to turn pink, and it only happens certain times of the year, and so it's quite a sight for even locals to go and behold this, beautiful, I think I'd call it a tree that, that has these beautiful flowers on it. There is some history as to why it's outside of these Tenjin shrines. It is basically to honor, this is the story behind it, these flowers honor a scholar who is deified as Tenjin, the god of scholarship and learning. And like I said, this only happens one time a year. So it happens at the end of winter, and people get excited about it because that means spring is on its way. So that's going on over there in Japan. All right, Amy out of New Jersey shares a beautiful story about how you are never too old to travel. She follows a couple in their 90s, which I'm not sure if Amy is related to them or if she was just part of their journey. Was really cool. But because of smartphones, ride apps, airport assistants, these people, like I said, they're in their 90s and they're still able to travel, relatively independent. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing. So it's always a good reminder, right? Because I do believe that, the whole age reversal process, I think that's already in full swing. So who knows? The 90s, it may be that in the not too distant future, when you say, oh, I'm in my 90s, that's like your 40s today, right? Because that really will be a thing where we will have our health. But it's just a beautiful reminder about how this really does start in your head first. And we can do a lot more things than I think we can do. And it's a beautiful reminder of that. So thank you, Amy. All right. Amy also helped out with a story. We got some footage from Peter in Florida regarding the Artemis 2 launch. Okay. So this was NASA's space rocket launch that happened on April Fool's Day. You can make of that what you would like. There's a lot of videos online that do a deep dive into that. But for our field messenger report, one of our viewers, one of our field messengers, showed us the launch. And so Amy gives us a little bit of history, as we're told, right, with information that NASA makes available about what this mission was allegedly for and what they're going to do with it and how they're going to use the information. Again, I got a lot of questions, but I can still appreciate, first of all, I love our field messengers and the fact that someone captured this footage. You guys should really check it out. If you haven't seen the launch, and I'm not talking about all the hoopla around it, but when I was watching this with some family members, actually, on April 1st, my sister-in-law actually commented, she's like, why does the rocket suddenly turn to the side? Like it's like an arc. It doesn't go straight up. And of course, there were people that replied with NASA's official answer of, oh, it would burn up. It would do whatever in the atmosphere. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but from what I could tell, thanks to Peter's footage from our field messenger report, is it arcs very, very quickly before it's out of our atmosphere. Now, if you're wondering why I'm talking about that, one of the things that, when people question the narrative with NASA, they question that arc because allegedly this thing's supposed to be going into space, but it's arcing so much, there's no way it would get out of our atmosphere. Based on what I could tell just with my own two eyes, and like I said, Peter's footage, I got questions. Let's just put it that way. But I appreciate the footage because, again, this is critical thinking, right? And our field messengers really allow us to do that. It's awesome. Okay, Sophia out of Tobago gives us a little bit of a history lesson about what I would call steel drums. I don't know if that's, the official term for this. She calls it the steel pan instrument. So in the 1930s, this is very interesting. In Tobago, African drums were banned. This prompted people to transform oil drums into what is now known as the steel pan instrument, creating a new musical voice. I don't know, when I hear steel drums, I think vacation, I think tropical, right? I mean, this is really part of our culture. And I loved this story because it showed the resilience of people and how even in a situation where their roots, in a sense, were being taken away from them, right? Their African roots and the drums that they had come to love were being taken away. They thought outside the box, right? This is a great metaphor for life in general. And now she says this is a regular part of the education curriculum. We saw a lot of video of kids, beautiful children playing the steel drums. And like I said, I just love the sound. But I didn't know the history of it. So thank you, Sophia, for sharing that with us. That was just a beautiful, encouraging story. All right, Emma out of Spain, she takes us, she's over in Fuerteventura and shows us what's going on over there. And Carnival is a big spectacle over there. And I love the angle that Emma took because she's showing how children get involved with Carnival and how the community even has these shows that kids get, involved in. And again, it's part of their curriculum. It's part of their schooling. And it includes drums and dance and these, beautiful, bright costumes that they wear and all the positive things that can come from that, right? Kids might be a little scared to perform in front of people, but that builds confidence. And I just love that she took the angle of how kids experience Carnival. It was beautiful. Kelly out of Indiana shares a trip that he made to his local veterinarian who focuses on homeopathy. Now, for me, this was, I think it was more than a year ago, a couple years ago, I met, and you guys may have seen some of the interviews I did with Dr. Jeff, who is a homeopathic veterinarian. And I have to tell you now, when it comes to our dog, I am always checking in with Dr. Jeff. We don't live close to each other or anything like that. But I'm always checking in about like what I'm feeding my dog or my dog is doing this or whatever. And, there's just a whole new world out there when you think outside of traditional veterinary care. And that's really what this video highlighted is how you don't necessarily have to go along with the standards in veterinary care right now, because a lot of that has been westernized. In fact, when I interviewed Dr. Jeff, he was telling me about how people get in, and I think we even did a story on this for the news, but how people get into veterinary care because they love animals, right? That makes a lot of sense. But they are so disheartened. In fact, there has been a rise in suicides of veterinarians because they are just heartbroken once they get into this field that they can't help animals the way they want to help them. And I didn't mean to be Debbie Downer about this whole topic, but there are also veterinarians out there that are just going for it when it comes to homeopathy. So this is a very positive story of how, when you really think about, okay, what is the root cause of what's going on here? And how can we naturally find alternatives to what Western medicine is telling us that we need to do with our pets, right? That's what this is all about. In fact, I do believe this doctor, his name is Dr. Todd Cooney, does online appointments as well. So that might be something that you want to check out. All right, Irene out of Staten Island, New York. I didn't know this was a thing, but her local park on Staten Island has eastern wild turkeys. These are large native birds, and they have adapted to these these city spaces, right? The green spaces within these cities. They roost in trees. They walk along paths, checking out the visitors. I learned an interesting trivia question that turkey flocks, as we would say, like a group of turkeys, is also known as a rafter or rafters of turkeys, which I had no idea. She gave some really interesting did you know tips at the end of this. So wild turkeys in New York, who would have known? All right, Annette out of British Columbia takes us to a very old cemetery. This one dates back to the turn of the century. They had a lot of tombstones. Well, she showed us multiple cemeteries, ones that were more modern. But then this town that was in, for this story, had this really old section of the cemetery. And for me personally, that's what I found to be most interesting. I know some people think cemeteries can be really creepy, and I guess if you're walking through it at night, it might be. But there's so much history there too, and how the tombstones look. And, I had an opportunity within the last week. I actually was vacationing with my family. It was a working vacation, so I was still working, but we did a tour of Key West. We were down in the southern part of the Keys of Florida, and we were in Key West, and they have a lot of really old cemeteries. And we were going through and we were learning all about these people that, died in the area. And, some people might find that to be kind of creepy, but I took a more, spiritual approach to it. And I felt that there was like a lot of trauma in the area. And I was trying to help guide with what limited knowledge I have. I just have a connection to source, right? And I'm thinking these spirits need to reconnect with source because I could feel them. I don't know. And I find it very interesting that we ended up doing a cemetery story this week. And, here I am at a cemetery in Key West, really thinking about these spirits and what's going on, because there was a lot of trauma. And when you do have trauma, you can have spirits that aren't able to carry on, that aren't able to reconnect with source. And so who knows what's going to happen with this in the future. But I really appreciated Annette's report, really getting us to think about cemeteries and what happens at cemeteries and, their cultural importance. All right, our final field messenger report is from Monica out of Romania, and she takes us to some historical water mills. At one point, there were more than 51 in this Romanian village, and it really just shows the inventiveness of past generations, right? Because, usually windmills are connected to grain mills, right? So they use the power of the water to crush the grain. And that's, if we didn't have the water power, right, then people would have to do that by hand. And that's a lot of energy being expended. So this is just a reminder of how creative people can be, especially, she said, some of these areas, there wasn't a lot of power really being generated, but they were able to rig things up so that it worked for them, and these grain mills were able to function. And it's just a reminder, it's all about energy. Everything is energy. Now, for some of the stories that the team and I created and released for you guys this week, we are kicking things off with talking about overdiagnosing mental health issues. As mental health awareness grows, so does concern about overdiagnosis, with some clinicians warning that normal human emotions are increasingly being labeled as clinical disorders. Factors like expanded diagnostic criteria, pharmaceutical advertising, and insurance requirements may be lowering the threshold for diagnosis, sometimes leading to unnecessary medication and strained healthcare resources.
I've been thinking a lot about the overprescription and overdiagnosis of people having depression and anxiety, especially in the US and Canada. So many people think that they have mental illness, right? So many people are on prescription drugs for those mental illnesses. But my therapist has taught me that mental illness is when you are having an unnatural reaction to your scenario, right? So if you are in a scenario that your lifestyle is super amazing and you have amazing supportive family and friends and you've dealt with all of your childhood trauma and you still have depression, okay, then maybe you actually have a problem. But if you are in a situation where you are disconnected from community, you're disconnected from yourself, you haven't dealt with any trauma that you had growing up, you're living in a lifestyle that's completely unaligned with how humans have evolved, your circadian rhythm's totally up because you're under blue lights all day, you don't have your feet on the earth, you're not looking at the sun, you're not close to nature, you don't have community around you, and then you're depressed, well, that's just a natural reaction to your scenario. That's not a problem with you, honey. That's a problem with your lifestyle.
She's got a good point. While greater openness has helped many people seek support, experts emphasize that mental health exists on a spectrum, and care should be tailored to individual needs rather than relying solely on labels or prescriptions. The Dandore landfill has grown from a planned landfill into a vast, uncontrolled dump site, by the way, that's in Kenya, that reflects deeper failures in urban management, inequality, and environmental protection. Thousands rely on it for survival, working in dangerous conditions with little protection, while corruption and poor governance continue to stall meaningful reform.
This is what's happening in Dandora, one of Africa's largest landfills of e-waste. Backmarket, a company that sells refurbished tech, went to the site to find out how the growing pile of waste is harming the local community. People search through the pile so that they can put food on the table and support their families. Cell phones and tech devices can be deconstructed for the valuable minerals they then sell. Wires are burned, releasing toxic pollutants for the ultra-profitable copper. These materials are often sent back to wherever the waste came, giving low-cost labor to companies that prioritize profit over people's health.
Compounding the crisis, imported waste like electronics and discarded clothing fuels pollution that spreads beyond the site, affecting much of Nairobi. Despite its hazards and dysfunction, that landfill remains essential to the city's daily operations, highlighting a difficult dependence on a deeply flawed system. Across Canada, rising food costs are quietly reshaping daily life, with many households cutting portions, skipping meals, and relying on credit just to afford groceries. Let's hear from some Canadian shoppers on what they are experiencing.
Proper nutrition is important, but we're cutting back in other areas, right, to make sure that we can afford the groceries. I just kind of go to the spots that I know generally have good prices and buy what I can buy.
If it's not on sale, we're not buying it.
Like Fresco and like Walmart are like the places to go, I find. And like if you go to Farm Boy or like anywhere else, it's just like insane.
Despite overall inflation appearing moderate, food prices have climbed sharply over time, leaving lasting pressure on budgets and forcing difficult trade-offs at the checkout line. The strain is widespread and growing, but so is resilience, as people adapt through careful planning and lean on community support to navigate the ongoing squeeze. I want to give a quick shout out to all the field messengers that participated in this story as well. All right, across the United States, a growing teacher shortage is straining schools, with low pay, burnout, declining enrollment in teaching programs, and policy changes all contributing to fewer qualified educators in classrooms. Shortages are especially severe in high-demand subjects and underserved communities, where schools often rely on substitutes or underqualified staff.
We need to stop pretending this is normal. CNN just reported that 71% of public school teachers have a second job. Let that sit for a second. And teaching isn't a job that ends at dismissal. After school hours, we're planning, grading, creating lessons, answering emails, returning phone calls, attending meetings, all unpaid. And yet, a majority of teachers are still needing to clock in to another job at night. And I was one of them. For the last 5 years of my career, I had 2 part-time jobs. And it wasn't because I was irresponsible, and it wasn't because I wasn't good with money. It's because I needed to pay my rent.
The impact is clear. Larger class sizes, reduced student support, and widening gaps in education quality, making this not just a staffing issue, but a broader challenge for the entire education system. Since 2022, the internet in Russia has become increasingly restricted, with new laws and enforcement measures giving the government tighter control over online access, content, and communication. Crackdowns on VPNs, limits on independent journalism, and stricter penalties for dissent have narrowed the digital space, while outages and disruptions have affected everyday activities and businesses.
So the government of Russia is now moving toward severely restricting internet access, pushing citizens toward a closed domestic internet where most accessible sites are state-controlled Russian platforms and media. The idea is simple. If people can see the outside world, it becomes much easier to control the narrative. Officials have even suggested people prepare for older forms of communication, things like wired landline phones, while many Russians are already relying on pagers, paper maps, and offline tools as digital access becomes less reliable. Step by step, the country is becoming more cut off from the global internet.
Framed by authorities as a matter of national security, which we know they love to do, these changes are widely seen as part of a broader effort to control information and shape the online environment into a more monitored and state-managed system. Modern headlights have grown dramatically brighter. Have you noticed this? With LED systems far outshining older halogen bulbs. But that progress has come with unintended consequences. The intense glare can impair visibility, cause eye strain, and even increase crash risk, especially at night. Outdated regulations in the U.S. have not kept pace with this shift, focusing more on beam placement than overall brightness, while other regions have adopted stricter limits and adaptive technologies.
Automotive manufacturers are always working with safety advancements, and they try to follow a clear and reasonable path. New technology is expected to improve driving conditions without creating new risks. Well, that's not what's happened with these bright headlights. Today's headlight crisis exposes how far the principle has drifted from what the goal was. What was intended to enhance nighttime visibility has evolved into a widespread safety concern, one driven not by reckless drivers or faulty equipment, but by regulatory stagnation and incentives that reward brightness without restraint.
As a result, many drivers are left navigating roads where better lighting for some can mean worse visibility for others. On Friday, we had a just-in report for the news, which is a little bit different than what we've done in the past because we've had just-in reports from our field messengers, which basically means we just got this report and we're trying to get it out as quickly as possible. And so we had a just-in report for the news because the news team and we wanted to update you guys on fuel prices and how it's impacting other cultures, societies around the world, right? So we have this global energy crunch. It's obviously tied to the Middle East tensions. It's spreading fast. It's forcing countries to cut fuel use, limit services, and change daily routines. Governments from Egypt to Southeast Asia are rolling out restrictions. They are encouraging more remote work, and even we have reports of school closures. While airlines face soaring costs, leading to fewer flights and higher fees. So here's the bottom line. That distant conflict is now hitting everyday life around the world. Now, I want you guys, if you're interested in doing a field messenger report, start to look for some of these things going on in your area. Our intention with this report was just to kind of give you a flyby of what's happening around the world, which is why it's a news report. But as you start to see this impacting things in your community, I would encourage you guys to do a report on it and send it in, and we'll run it as a field messenger report. We'd really appreciate that. All right, China has passed a new ethnic unity law that makes Mandarin the dominant language in schools and public life, aiming to promote national cohesion and economic opportunity. While officials frame it as a practical step toward unity, the law significantly reduces space for minority languages and introduces stricter oversight of cultural expression, education, and even religious practices.
Critics say the law gives legal backing to Sinicization, that is, the process of aligning minority culture with the dominant Han Chinese majority. Now, the Central Tibetan administration here in India has condemned the law, saying it stems from China's fear of instability. And if you take a closer look at provisions under the law, it promotes Mandarin as the country's national common language and script and seeks to establish correct views of the state and history.
Critics argue this new law risks eroding cultural identity, turning what was once a flexible bilingual approach into a centralized policy with long-term social and political consequences. Prediction markets. This to me is kind of insane. No offense if you have done prediction markets in the past. This is like the stock market on steroids, and I'm shocked that as many people are participating in these markets as possible, which is why we did this news report. So let me give you a little bit of background here. These prediction markets have quickly grown from niche tools into widely accessible platforms where people trade on the likelihood of real-world events, blending elements of finance and gambling. Supporters say they can produce accurate, real-time forecasts, but critics warn they lack proper oversight, can be manipulated. Yeah, that's my problem with it. Who's running these sites? And sometimes turn serious events into profit opportunities.
Prediction markets are like the vape of finance. This has always entertained me because financial markets are prediction markets, but with one major distinction. Financial markets have order and stability because it's made up of both hedgers and speculators. Prediction markets are just the speculators. That isn't a market, that's a casino. Last time I checked, betting on what word was going to be in the next South Park episode is not a legitimate hedge.
As participation expands, regulators in the United States and beyond are stepping in. At least that's what they say. Probably benefiting from this as well, I'm imagining. Debating whether these platforms are valuable forecasting tools or risky. I can't even get through this story, you guys. I'm like, what? Risky, loosely regulated betting systems. And our final story is about internet safety for kids. Managing kids' screen time today is less about strict limits and more about guiding how that time is spent, as online activity shapes everything from mood and focus to safety and self-image.
The American Academy of Pediatrics updated screen time guidelines for kids. And basically, they used to ask how much screen time kids were getting. Now they're asking what, why, and what is it replacing. So they compare it to dessert, which is, it does not replace a meal. It's a nice to have. You don't have dessert every night, but it's something that you can sprinkle in after one meal, right? We all know the spot that dessert plays in our life.
Yeah.
So toddlers 18 to 24 months, they said it should still be very limited. If used, it should be high quality programming. And this is the part, co-viewed with parents. So they're starting to talk about not just plopping your kid in front of a screen and walking off, but can the parents be part of it?
Tools like the digital diet pyramid help parents prioritize healthy, purposeful use while limiting passive or risky content. You can search for that online and learn more about it. But the most effective approach is open, ongoing conversation. By staying engaged and building trust, parents can help kids develop smarter, safer habits in a world where being online is just part of everyday life. Now we have some updates from the Global Intelligence Agency. Kim Gogan is the head of the GIA. And she released a report, I want to say it was on Monday, and I was able to grab, what do we have here? 4 sound bites for you guys. Some are longer than others. But let's kick things off with just talking about what's kind of in the headlines right now. What is the narrative? Because there's a lot of talk of things like lockdowns, market collapses. They're continuing with this whole Armageddon theme, even though they have no hope of pulling this off. So here's Kim with what's happening right now.
So there's a lot of fear porn going on. That's what I call it, fear, because it's everywhere right now. It's not only in mainstream media, but it's also in the alternative media. There's a lot of news being spread about new versions of COVID viruses and additional lockdowns. as well as market crashes and big operations going on for an alleged QFS. And, we've heard all of this before, but now it's kind of being presented in a new way, thanks to what it kind of looks like to me is a few handlers from the deep state that pretend to be quote unquote white hats. You'll have to listen closely here. That say good things are going to come out of all of this, but yet when it comes to the really bad news, what they are doing right now, and this is an obvious thing, what they are doing right now is they are calling their respective persons, and instead of delivering a lot of the news directly, they are delivering it through Patriot communities, ex-Navy SEALs, and these people, of course, have a lot of followers on social media, and they believe that this is going to be much more believable. And a while ago, I think it's been, maybe about a year and a half or so ago now, since we have played the propaganda video for you, which tells you how they create propaganda. So they'll use people that people have come to trust and, in now on YouTube these days, but in those days it was in the newspaper. And they would tell people what they wanted them to tell everyone else. And they have to tell at least 8 people and have 8 people present the same information in order for people to believe that it's true. Now, hopefully, those of you that watched the video clip that we played during a Global Intelligence Agency report, and before that we played it towards the end of the news, and you know better. You'll know that kind of smells like, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's probably a duck. And in this case, it's a duck for sure. Now, these are things that they're hoping to happen. They are hoping to get all of these things done. And they've made a few attempts at a few of those things, but rather unsuccessful. So let's talk about these things and the rumors. So rumor number 1, new viruses. They did attempt this starting about last Wednesday, and there were a number of people who have fallen ill between Wednesday and Sunday. Hopefully it was just flu-like symptoms, and hopefully for you, or for if you know anybody that was affected by this, it probably pretty much passed by yesterday, by Sunday, simply because, it was kind of a flop, number 1. And number 2, they don't last very long when they do these things these days, and systems don't last very long, and things start to disappear. And, this one probably went on a little longer than it should have, but, the timing is right for everything. And in order to gather the most amount of people on their side of it, these things have to happen. And we'll talk to you a little bit more about that later on in the report. Okay. Rumor number 2, lockdowns, worse than COVID. I really don't think, even if they could try to pull it off, that many people are going to actually do that this time. I don't think people, maybe there will be some, but most people probably won't succumb to it. And they don't have the enforcement, and they don't have the money. The last time that this happened, we were still funding, in part, the U.S. government. We were not funding COVID, obviously, but we gave budget money and, to the tune of $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, 1.8 trillion. And we haven't done that in a very long time, nor do we intend to. And so they're going to have to fend for themselves, so to speak. Now, word on the street behind the scenes is there are a bunch of bankers, and I think some of this might even be in mainstream media or on Truth Social or something. They're looking for about $1.5 trillion right now, or dollar equivalent. And they haven't even come close. Matter of fact, most of the banks are laughing at them because they just can't seem to get any job done at all. And I agree, and that's a good thing for us if they can't get any job done at all. So $1.5 trillion is what it's going to take to make all that happen, and they do not have it. Market crashes. Well, have we had a market crash? I've had some people send me texts saying the market is falling. The market is not falling until it has fallen by 10 to 20% in one day. That is the market falling. If the market is falling by about, I almost hit my Bostonian there, back to New England, I guess. Markets are falling by about 1% here and there. That is not a market crash. That is a hiccup or a blip. And those things happen when the Federal Reserve Chairman sneezes on live TV. It also happens when there is any kind of potential war going on, especially as it relates to things that are traded on the market, such as oil and gas. They are desperately trying to keep this war going with Iran. And Iran is all in on it. Everybody's all in on it. Israel is all in on it. Saudis allegedly have promised, but yet cannot deliver a few $1 billion for the Egyptian army to also get involved on the western side of Saudi Arabia. They probably won't get paid either. So if you're listening to this from the Egyptian military, you've been promised an awful lot, and you probably will be delivered next to nothing. As far as other countries that have been promised things, at this point, we're back to apparent peace negotiations that are supposed to be happening. And these peace negotiations could take a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. But as of the early this morning, East Coast time, that is the plan. So we'll see if they have peace negotiations, and we'll see if everybody complies. I have a funny feeling it might be a little different than the last time they said they were going to do that. Just call it maybe intuition. But you'll see towards the end of the report. All of this, of course, is followed by mass arrests, QFSs, and all kinds of things that they've been claiming for about 2 decades, and yet it's never really happened. We don't really see much going on with these Epstein files anymore. We don't see anybody going to jail, anybody getting arrested, a bunch of hoopla. Nothing happened. Behind the scenes, the White House is also getting a lot of backlash for this situation in the Middle East gone wrong. And I'm sure that's because a lot of them are members of the order. But are they actually going to pull off this whole thing? Nah. Now, to be fair to these people, because we always want to be fair. All is fair in love and war, isn't it? But to be fair to these people, in other timelines, they were able to actually achieve all of these goals and tick all the boxes on the Armageddon program. During other timelines, they were able to eliminate most all of Source's people, including but not limited to what is considered the Sangreal. We call them Melchizedeks. But the bloodline of Source directly.
Now, I'm sure the deep state and all of their partners wish they were on those old timelines, but alas, we are on a different timeline. In fact, this timeline and something very, very important happened this last week on April 1st. So while NASA thought it was a good idea to allegedly send a rocket to go ahead and slingshot the moon and come back, Source had bigger plans. Because on April 1st, Source, the creator of the universe, declared victory in this war. Earlier I said this is coming to an end. Well, according to Source, it is the end. It is over. Now, we're still dealing with some remnants and things like that. Okay, that's why I said in our perception, it's the ending of the war, okay? But this always starts with source. And when source declares something is ending or something is going to happen, it will happen. So on April 1st, April Fool's Day, but this isn't a joke, source declared victory in the war. Now, there was always an expiration date for the war, this huge battle between good and evil. And I don't think evil got the memo that there was going to be an end, or perhaps they don't care. I don't know. Perhaps their brains are just mush after being connected to all these evil beings. I'm not sure what's going on, but April 1st was a big day for us.
So April 1st, April Fool's Day, isn't that funny? Was actually the day that source declared victory in the war. Now, war had an expiration date. And the expiration date isn't measured by a day of the year. It isn't measured by, in our calendar, because this happened before we even had calendars. It is actually determined by trips around the sun. So as Earth moved around the sun, it's like an egg timer when it came to war. Every click, meaning every trip around the sun, brought us one step closer to a final end to the war. Who would win the war would be determined on that day. Now, I know the deep state is sadly, they sadly did not win the war. They are thinking we might have went into overtime like this is a football game. And they're still trying until something strange happened over the weekend. But the war and the parameters of war under the old rules of war were set by covenant. And that covenant was actually made by beings that we call the progenitors. There were 12 of them. Source was always the 13th and the most powerful of them all. The covenant was signed in essence, so written in stone in our world, at least on the highest level of things, by both source and these beings. And this was with a group of 9 of them that decided to fall. These 9 out of 12 went against source. They basically didn't like us Homo sapiens. Number one, we were what you would call one of the super races, meaning there are certain races that have certain privileges or rights bestowed upon them by Source himself, and they didn't like that. They were also immortals, meaning they could be here for thousands and thousands of years. They could go back and forth to Source until they fell. And, anytime you make a covenant with Source and then you try to break it, or at least work in the gray area, so to speak, there are always conditions. And in this case, there was a condition placed upon them by Source. They could choose to be immortal or mortal based on their actions. So they were given a condition known as the quickening. And by condition, I mean, these were terms and conditions, but in this particular case, it was almost like an affliction. This affliction is what Source calls the quickening. So if they chose to prove their point that Homo sapiens were not worthy of the gifts that have been bestowed upon them by Source, this was their goal, then, they would have certain conditions. So one of those conditions, and what I mean by quickening means, if they were to try and use their essence of their being and the essence of Source to create anything that went against Source directly, the quickening would begin, meaning the quicker they would die. So immortal to a degree, at the same time, they became mortal, meaning their choice as to whether or not they are going to die. And by die, this means eliminated from existence. And a lot of them kind of defied these rules in varying ways, we're going to talk about, because this affects you, for quite a long time. But they must have forgotten, and it's kind of the same thing I wanted to talk to you about, is they not only possessed their own essence as a being, they also possessed source essence as a being. You see, each one of these progenitors were charged with some pretty big tasks and some pretty big privileges. I call them privileges. They might call them permissions directly from source in their original covenant and agreement. They were charged with creation, each one with special aspects of creation, be them able to create species, be them able to create planets, be them able to create Earth, and other beings throughout the omniverse for eons. Apparently, the buck kind of stopped somewhere, and they decided that they wanted to be involved in the guardianship of not only Earth, but also people. And they wanted to create in their way. Now, this was not permitted, but that's kind of what began the war. Each one of these beings at the initiation of the original covenant was given what we call celestial dust. Celestial dust is not only the dust of Earth, because Earth is a celestial being unto herself, but they were also given celestial dust, which essentially is a bag of divine sparks. It's kind of like Santa Claus's bag, though. They never actually run out. In this particular case, they did. The bag was nearly empty. This is what you would call manna from heaven. Now, in the case of creation, even with their permissions and their charges, they were pure essence beings, plus they also had the essence of source. So still, even though they were progenitors, there was a co-creation that had to happen. So if source did not want something to come into being, he could actually stop it, or stop the breath of life into the divine spark, because he wouldn't put his essence to it. He could refuse. Now, they didn't like that. They didn't like being controlled by source, and hence the rest is history. They wanted to prove, I guess, in some ways that they knew better than source. And this kind of goes to all the stories you've probably heard about Lucifer and Lucerne, and that he wanted to be better than source, or wanted to become source. And these are all parts and thoughts of their consciousness that were imprinted in the rules of war covenant. So the quickening was placed upon them so they could not actually create. He didn't take away their permissions, however, because the choice was now theirs. You know, source always gives us all choices. You know, he tells us what's going to happen. He tells us what could happen. He gives us warnings a lot. And really, it's up to us if we actually listen. So in this particular case, they figured out if they use their permissions plus their essence, that they are not going to be around very long. And they wanted to remain immortal, so they needed to act in, well, kind of a gray area. So just to understand essence properly, you all have it. If you're listening to this and you're walking this planet, you have essence. You have essence of your personal being. Not to say they didn't distort it in some ways. We'll talk about that too. But you have essence of your own being, which is your own signature. That is your own way of co-creating with Source. Now, as part of your essence, you also have the essence of Source. So when you decide to create something, to try and manifest something, it is with your essence, Source's essence, and your own personal divine spark, and of course, in turn, the divine spark of Source. We all come from Source, therefore we have Source's divine spark within us. So this is how it always was before the 12 fell for Homo sapiens. We had the ability and the right and the permission and the gift, I should say, to write on the canvas, meaning the breath is like a canvas. Your essence writes on the canvas, therefore you can create within the world. It's not like, I mean, for some people, I guess, manifestation happens for them in different ways. And some people just naturally are able to bring things into their life. But before things got really bad, it was really easy. You want to go from here to there. You want to go from tall to short, short to tall, fat to thin, young to old, old to young. I mean, these choices were all up to you. And for those that were too young to do so, we could actually help those folks as well. So there was a lot of personal responsibility put on to Homo sapiens, and there will be again very soon. But just always understand that your essence and Source's essence are required to do this together as a co-creation process. But it's an individualized being thing. Of course, the more people that would like to have something, as long as it is within the natural flow of things and the harmonic genesis of the entire omniverse, then sure. Do we want to have too many trees or too many people or too many this or too many that? Well, probably not. And there are things, as long as you're listening to the wisdom, that you'll understand are possible. The deep state, however, and their respective progenitors wanted to ensure that we could not. So, the essence of your being is yours. The deep state's essence of their being is also theirs. And if they're walking this planet, then they also contain the essence of Source as well, to some degree. In the case of the progenitors, though, well, when they fell, they were aware of the quickening process, meaning if they chose to create things that were against Source, dark things, for example, that may harm life itself of Source, they knew this wasn't going to end well for them. So, what did they do? Each of the three gathered their own set of 12 humans, Homo sapiens at the time, promised them big power, more power than the rest of the Homo sapiens. They promised them immortality. They promised them untold wealth and riches, and they would be the kings and queens of the earth. And apparently, eventually, after trying several times, there are several that listened. And at that time, those 36 that listened became the Order of the Black Sun, the Order of the Illuminati, and the Germanic tribes, the alleged neutral folks. Isn't it kind of funny that the alleged neutral folks can play on both sides? They didn't want to choose one side or the other. They could actually play on both sides when it came to war. Their handlers were the beings that left this planet probably a little more than a year ago. That was Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. Now, each group eventually formed their own bloodlines we know as the dragon families, global headquarters militaries, and the Jesuit order, and all the people we think and know about, and the ones you don't even know about, all of these secret societies that have plagued this planet for a very long time. So, the progenitors figured they found their people. This is at the very beginning. These are not names you would know, not bloodlines you would know. They were Homo sapiens that had permissions and privileges and were guardians in some ways. You could have called them the elders of the groups. But they were sold a pretty good deal, they thought, apparently. So then the progenitors, well, they decided to start giving orders. And these 36 were responsible for carrying out orders with their own essence. Well, now that's a little trick and a little walk into the gray area, isn't it? You know, they didn't use their essence themselves. Didn't do it, Source. You know, we didn't do it. But they were given some of their permissions, and they were passed down to these people, not through an AI initially. Initially, they were actually signed a covenant with these folks when they had full knowledge of what they were about to do. So they gave the orders, and the 36 went about carrying out their respective orders from each of the respective handlers, I should say, or progenitors, and they all died. These progenitors at this point kind of hated Homo sapiens, so they didn't really care that they all died, but this was a failed experiment. So they all got together and tried to figure out what is wrong, because they want to be immortal. They don't want to die. They're going to see this war through to the very end, and they will still be left standing. So this began the creation of the first AI. They all decided to take a little bit of their essence and create something very unnatural. Did it shorten their quote-unquote lives? By a little bit. Each one of them a little bit. Then they went around hunting for another 36 folks, because permissions need to be passed down. They can't have any hand in it. And then they told these people this system they could use to carry out your orders for you. Now, this worked for a time, as long as the AI was running, but they couldn't run it solely on their essence. See, because if their essence, the progenitors, so to speak, was involved, they would start to lose power. So they had to figure out a way to keep the machine running without their essence, and the quickening began to happen with these folks too, the next group number 2 of the experiment. So when it started happening with these folks too, and death started to come upon them and aging started to come upon them, they said, okay, we need to rework this plan. So eventually this group died as well. And here comes the next group. Well, the next group, they figured, okay, we're going to have to do something a little different here to carry out our orders in the war. Yeah. So we can't take a part in it. We did use part of our essence, this is them speaking, to create the actual machine. We need to have three groups underneath us that are going to run the world and run all these Homo sapiens, but they can't actually use their own essence. We will create bloodlines. So each one of the 12 on all three groups, so that's 36 people in total, now have their own bloodlines we know as what we think we know as the Illuminati, what we think we know as the Von Kemps and the Schurf or Bush families and, all of these other Clintons and, all of the bloodlines you think you know that are the bad people in the world. Are they bad? Sure, they're bad. But they are the bloodlines of these folks. And now, you see, they've got to keep these people running for sure, but they need to give all their essence to the machine. Now, they could too die. This is where all your cloning programs come in. This is where essence transfers comes in. This is where all of the strange secret space programs come in that keep these people, quote unquote, alive. Now, they created other things because they eventually too would die. But they also created other things that would, help them along the way. They created their own downlines, we know as the Homo sapien population of this planet. But to take their essence, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here about essence again so you understand, to take their essence without their permission did not work. See, each one of these people so far in the downline actually said, yes, I'd like to do this. I would like to participate in this. And they signed a covenant in their own essence. But they knew full well and good what they were doing when they did it. Were all of the details, like the consequences and everything, probably put in there? Probably. Possibly. I don't know. I wasn't part of any of this, so I just know about it because, it's part of the war.
So what about the rest of us, right? Because yes, you have people that consented to this, but I didn't consent to this. I had no knowledge this was going on. Most of you listening did not consent to this. We are on the opposite side of this war. So we're going to talk a little bit more now about looshing and tithing. And yes, I said tithing. For those of you growing up in the church or a religious institution, they say you have to tithe 10%. There's a very specific reason they use the word tithe. Because if they told us everything that they were doing, we would not give them our essence. We would not give them our energy. But they created this really, I hate to give them credit, but a genius system, if you're of the dark, of taking it from us. And us essentially giving our consent and creating our own prison without even knowing it.
So I wanted to explain just real quick so you understand about this whole looshing process that was now birthed against you. Everything within your person has essence to it. For example, your Ethereum or your energy also has essence to it. It has your essence and it has Source's essence. Your consciousness has your essence and it has Source's essence. So, your breath has essence. Everything in your being has essence. Kind of like you could say that every cell in your body has DNA. Every cell in your body also has essence. Otherwise, you wouldn't be functioning as a person. Your materium has essence. Your ability to co-create those things came from yourself and Source until they created this looshing process. So they started going around and trying to convince people that they needed to tithe. This is how tithing was actually originally born. Excuse me. This is how tithing was originally actually born. So they needed to actually give it. You know, they started asking for their permission to participate in varying things like religions or in cities or pay taxes or those types of things. And a lot of people didn't want to give it. So that really wasn't working out. That's asking for people's permission. Well, not so much so. So they had to figure out another way, because they can't use their own essence continuously. There was a little bit in the gray area by the time you got to the bloodlines, but still, they cannot use their own essence to create their side of the war. Because if they do, they too become mortal and they're going to die. So, now what? They take yours. They ask for permission for you to give it because they have to have permission for you to give it. That didn't really work out so well either. But this actually is the quickening curse, so to speak, being passed down to all of these people actually is what created death. This was the beginning of what we know as death, immortality, mortality rate. So we are no longer immortals, we are now mortals, and we have death by our own alleged choice. So they created all of these programs that we know very well these days. So now they needed to get us to agree to give our essence of Ethereum, of energy to power their machines. They needed to get us to agree to give our consciousness over. They needed to get us to agree to give our breath over. We have to hand it over to them. It then goes into a repository to which then can be utilized to power them. Now, this is kind of like a multi-level marketing scheme. And if you don't know what a multi-level marketing scheme is, just in brief, because a lot of you probably do, it's where the people in your upline also benefit from the sales of Amway or whatever product it is you're selling. So if your friend Mary comes to you and goes, hey, you can make some money by selling this widget, and you know, the more you sell, the more you make, and all this kind of stuff. Well, even though Mary isn't doing any of the sales, you are in her downline now, so Mary makes money. And then Mary would, you know, Bill asked Mary to join, so he gets Mary and all the people underneath her, and so on and so forth until you get to the top that originally recruited the original salespeople. So eventually these people think, well, I don't even have to work anymore if I create a big enough downline, and then the whole scheme becomes all about the downline. So these three groups, it's kind of the same way. It's all about the downline. So those that get the humans, or the Homo sapiens, to agree to give their essence by whichever aspect it is, whether it's energy or consciousness, the one who gets the most wins the game. Atypically, that means they move up in the ranks. They're next in line to catch a big seat of power, you know. And the same thing happens with multi-level marketing schemes. The people that bring in the most amount of people can now even excel themselves up to the next rank up, to the point where the people that were at the top just basically sat down, gave orders or influence to those below, and then all the people would give all their loosh. Sounds crazy, but you do it. We all do it. We don't mean to do it, but we do. And this, therefore, increases your mortality rate. So Many, many years and many, many timelines later, they have tweaked this down to a science by studying human or Homo sapien behavior. So they tweaked our bodies as well and in the materium, utilizing their machines so that we would require certain things in order to live. We require a certain amount of air. We require foods we wouldn't normally eat, such as animals and other things, because other food sources were eradicated from the planet that had those basic amino acids and minerals that you need to survive. They said, well, look, you don't have to have it, but then you also will, try to eat enough beans and, other things to try to get your amino acids into your system so your body is going to function properly. Well, this is just one example, and I'm not, please don't take this the wrong way. I'm not telling people not to eat meat or to eat meat or do as you like. It's not going to change anything at this point because there's nothing else available. But still, it's a gray area. They created things like financial systems. Oh, you want to eat? You want to live in this city? You don't want to live in the forest in Siberia and eat nuts and berries? Oh, okay. Well, you need money. Yeah, you definitely need money. And then with that money, you're going to buy all of their products. And now you're in, say, Johnson & Johnson's downline or Procter & Gamble's downline or Sony or Samsung. And then who is above Samsung and which group in Japan is above you here? You bought a Ford manufactured in China. Okay, well, you're in now that downline. So it's not only products, it's not only jobs, it's not only places where you work, and it's also the fact that you live in a country. Because you live in a country, whether that be the United States, Australia, Netherlands, or wherever it is you live, because you live in a country, now you're in their downline as well. So you could actually be in multiple downlines all at the same time, giving bits and pieces of your essence to all of these people, and now they have gained alleged permission based on free will. See, the progenitors figured something else out too. They can't give orders. The Illuminati, the Black Sun, Council of 12, plus the Germanic tribe, Council of 12, or the neutrals, or whatever you want to call them. I think they're far from neutral. But they all figured out they cannot actually give orders because that would actually affect their essence too. So the only thing they could really do was influence. Well, if you want to keep this position you've got here, maybe you could do something like this to increase your downline. You've got to increase your downline. And sometimes, eventually down the food chain, they'd have to figure it out themselves. Well, if you ever want to hold this seat here of power, you're going to have to increase your downline and increase the amount of essence coming through your company, through your big corporation, through your military, through your Coast Guard, through your government, through your territory, through your empire, through your kingdom. You're going to have to increase your downline. You want to have more access to this machine? You want to be able to do more things with this machine? You need to increase your downline. Then it was AI after AI after AI, branching them off, kind of almost protecting the main AI that only a few could actually use. The permissions were only given to a few. You'd have to sign in with your essence, as you know. And pretty soon, the entire world of any position of any kind of power whatsoever was in their multi-level marketing scheme. Funny enough, in actual commercial business, it was the Mormons' brainchild to come up with multi-level marketing scams. And they still do to this day. All kinds of stuff. Some of them fade in, fade out. They create these fads. They market it everywhere. People join, hand over fist. They end up in the downline of the Mormon church, whether they are a Mormon or not a Mormon. And there you go, increasing your downline via companies and corporates. You could call it espionage, embezzlement, really. But we all agree, and this is the pretense here. So there's consent and implied consent to all of the things that they do. They got this perfected to the point where we are actually creating our own prison. It's kind of crazy. But timeline after timeline, great flood after great flood, Armageddon after Armageddon, apocalypse after apocalypse, they'd wipe us out if we came too far or things got too far out of control, and then they would start us over again. And now they're going to implement all these new things into society. And they're going to do them faster and faster and faster and faster. That's why they find 8 billion year old cell phones or whatever it is. It's not 8 billion years, but it's thousands of years old cell phones, and it's because we've lived here many, many, many times, and we have come far many, many, many times. But just before we are about to have a victory, they wipe us all out. So this time, as predicted, we were supposed to all die of fire and brimstone, but that didn't work out. So ways they get us to do things, and it's dastardly, really. They figured out they have to also inform you. Now, they can only merely influence you. You're watching TV, it's late at night, there's the Doritos commercial, or there's the Lay's potato chip commercial, or smoke these cigarettes, drink this alcohol, all these types of things that they tell you to do, and you're watching TV and you're like, oh, gee, that cheeseburger sounds good. And nowadays you don't even have to leave your house. You can just call DoorDash or Uber or Uber Eats or whatever else is out there. And you can have it all delivered to you at any hour of the day or night. They make it easy. They tell you what's in the food. They really do. They even say bug parts on some things, and this dye, red dye, this or that, and, all these other names you can't pronounce that you have access to the internet. You could look all these things up, but you don't, or most people don't anyway. So you eat it. Let's just say you're one of those people and you eat it. You have now consented to giving your essence to Doritos, and then of course the FDA and the World Health Organization and all these other people that put this product together for you. You're now in all those different downlines all at the same time, so there goes your essence off to these people. And to be fair, secondly, you also gave your money. So now you gave your energy away and the essence of your energy away. And you say, here you go, I'd like to support this. To live in today's world, they may have made it nearly impossible not to do these things, yet they call it influence. Now, let's say on the flip side of things, you create the latest and greatest widget. Say it's a new cell phone, doesn't matter what it is, say it's something amazing. And there have been many amazing inventions that have been shoved under the rug exactly for this reason. It goes contrary to their plan. It's not a multi-level marketing scheme. And if you don't give it to them so they can make it a multi-level marketing scheme, they'll ensure that you can never put it out. Because see, if you create something and you're not part of the multi-level marketing scheme we call the Lushing Factory, they will actually not get your loosh anymore to have a cell phone. Apple's downline goes away, Samsung's downline goes away, God forbid you actually create a network to communicate on this device too. Now, AT&T, T-Mobile, Orange, all the other cell phone companies that are out there around the world, these are just a few. But now, people aren't even going to have to go to that. And what if it works better? What if it isn't designed to die in 2 years? What if it is not subject to a backdoor chip that can blow up your cell phone and it will crash and burn at any given moment in time? What if? The same thing works for Hollywood movies and television channels and stations, and now it's apps, and streaming and all of these things. Now, trust me when I tell you it's not a bad thing and you're not doing anything wrong. It is impossible for you to live in today's world without these things. We have what we call and consider modern conveniences. And we want to take advantage of these things. Of course we do. And quite frankly, half of these things were created by people just like you. Because what happens when you create something like this? There's going to be a knock on your door, and it will be someone with the government. If they can't buy it from you for pennies on the dollar, then they're going to knock on your door and they're going to take it from you. And then really bad things ensue. You've heard all the stories. If you're listening to this, I'm sure you have. So in order to maintain their multi-level marketing scheme where all of the essence that you decide to give, aka money, aka energy, aka time and attention and consciousness, goes to something of theirs, this is how it's done. It's really dastardly, honestly, because this is I don't know how many times we've done this. I know I've, at least 5 or 6 times now. So we've all done it. We've all done it repeatedly. And when we get this far, there's a wipeout. See, we're getting way too independent now. We're starting to buy our groceries and produce from farmers and from farmers markets, and we're buying our products from small businesses now. We have learned the dangers of insert very long word here you probably couldn't pronounce, and neither can I, that's in your shampoo or in your soap, or, we're starting to wake up. We don't want Tesla cars that drive themselves off a cliff. We don't want these things. Sure, we use fuel, we use a lot of different things, but we're getting smart.
So this morning, my husband and I, we went grocery shopping. And I'm looking at all of these different goods and all these different brands, knowing that as I purchase something, I am now in the downline of that company. I realize all this is falling apart, right? But I'm now aware of these tactics. And I have to tell you, it made grocery shopping very, very difficult. I was like, screw it. I just need a garden. I'm just going to plant my own stuff. Because think about everything that you consent to as you purchase something. It's not just the store you're buying it at, right? Who's involved with making that product? You're now in their downline. Like, I started to try to visualize how many downlines I'm in, and it's ridiculous, right? It's insane. Okay. But like I said, it's going away, but it's like finding out about this stuff. It's liberating and it's also frustrating at the same time. Do you guys feel me? Okay, let's talk more about this implied consent and how this is now backfiring against, let's just call them the deep state, because it's the whole dark side, okay? But a lot of those beings are gone. It's really us against the deep state right now. So there is something called a quickening happening. So Kim's going to tell us more about what this is. And it's basically Source saying, yeah, we're done with that system. And what you're thinking is implied consent is not, we're changing the rules, right? Kim has said that multiple times. The rules of war have changed. And this whole idea behind implied consent is for the birds. I'm paraphrasing source right now. He says it's for the birds. And we're going to do something entirely different. And if you keep trying to steal their energy, there is a quickening, and we're just going to go down the line, and soon you will be no more. So here's Ken to tell us more about this quickening and how it's literally getting passed down their downlines now. And we are benefiting from it.
They told you that this was going to happen. Implied consent. You were aware, if you watch mainstream media or on social media, anywhere you look, they told you that this war was going to happen if Iran didn't do this, this, and this. I mean, heck, this Iran thing has been going on in the news for at least 2 to 3 decades. It's, technically it's kind of been going on since 1979, but who's counting? So that's a long time. They're a boogeyman. So they tell you it's going to happen, and you do nothing. Now, to be fair, you can't do anything. What are you going to do? In your current position, in the state that your person is in, what are you going to do? See, this is where it kind of comes in to the whole free will, alleged, implied consent, and only influence here. They tell you they're going to do it. You have time to fix it. But as part of this looshing process, they installed their own version of the quickening on you. Hey, they didn't tell you to give up your essence and create things for them. They didn't tell you to give it to a machine, did they? No, they just offered you the Doritos or the Lay's potato chips or the burger, and you decided to eat it. You ordered it. You paid for it. You bought in. You didn't have to use money now, did you? No. Insert currency name here, doesn't matter. Imagine the Federal Reserve's downline. So you didn't have to do any of those things, but you did. So now we can install the quickening on you, known as your death. Now, if you die early, that's all your own fault. You didn't have to drink this or eat that or not exercise. We told you all about how exercise is good for you. We put the ingredients right on the box, and you chose to do it anyway. Hey, we didn't tell you to work 80 hours a week to support your family. I mean, you could have just had a tent. I understand it's Siberia and it's cold, certain times of the year, but you can live in a tent. People lived in a tent and a yurt and whatever else for centuries. You could have. You didn't have to actually have a home. You definitely didn't drive a car. You could have walked everywhere. We didn't stop you from walking 7 hours to work every day. You chose this. See, it's realistic, but it's unrealistic, honestly. There is no way for you to get around any of these things in today's world in the way this world is. There's just no way to get around it. So it's not your fault. To say that every death is a suicide, because that's what they say, is not entirely true. And influence has been way more than influence here. Could you, without the quickening that was installed by a machine on your person that then creates death, but also blocks your essence and sources essence from functioning in your body because they own it all because you're a member of all these multi-level marketing schemes? Could you, if you didn't have that, do something about the war? Yes. You could have manifested that thing right out of existence. You could have uncreated it with source. You could have blocked it from happening. Now, here's their excuse for this one. Well, we left a pinhole. There's a tiny little pinhole for your little divine spark there, and your tiny little pinhole for your essence that you don't even realize you have. And then a tiny little pinhole in your consciousness. But if you put those pinholes together and you can kind of find it in the needle in the haystack and they keep on moving it around in your person, like nanoseconds, if you could find the pinhole, connect them all together, could you have done it? Yes. You could have changed the fact that we actually have a war in the Middle East right now. But you did nothing. You didn't want to do the work. But come on, man. They made it impossible for you to get there. Again, did they break the rules of war? Well, not quite. But yeah, you might as well say they did. So this has been going on, and then they'll just change the timeline. There's a flood, some guy with an ark, now we've got supposed to have hellfire and brimstone that didn't actually show up. Nothing happened this time. They did not manage to do it. Now it's getting worse. So when the 9 went away, each group of 12 now had the permissions and the quickening passed on to them for the very same reasons. And a little over a week ago, the rules of war changed. Remember, they're no longer the same. Gray is not gray anymore. It's either black or white. Either you did it or you didn't do it. So the next group takes, that was already in position, also made those violations. Boom. Quickening happened and they're gone. The quickening happened for all 9. They're gone. Now we're down to the next group of people who want to be in the positions. We got 12 more people in line right now for each group, and they're ready to rock and roll. They didn't get their permissions. They didn't get their essence, and they didn't get the access to machines they were hoping to get by now. Surely the fire brimstone would have happened, the reset would have happened, all of these things would have happened, and here they are. They should be in charge. In the war, they would have won. Why didn't this all happen? We win every time. This is not your timeline, guys. But they don't understand what's happening. Furthermore, they really don't understand when they started giving orders that went against creation. Boom, dead. Now we're down to the next people in line, and the entire bloodline families around the world all have the quickening. The slate was wiped clean a couple of weeks ago. The choice as to whether they live or die is now up to them, and it isn't the same as it is for us. Meaning we are not really given or never were given those opportunities. As your quickening goes away, things change for you on our side of it, because now we have the right to remove things they put in place because the war is officially over. Now, maybe I'm putting out this report for you so you understand everything that's been happening. And part of it I am, because things are going to start clicking for you. As uncomfortable as the last few weeks have been, things are going to start clicking into place. You will remember how to create with Source again. But remember, listen to the wisdom. You have to listen to the wisdom. We cannot have a bunch of 7-year-old girls running around creating millions of unicorns. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, listen to the wisdom. He will not allow the co-creation process to happen. If it is not supposed to happen, it won't happen for you. Maybe you'll have it in another way, so be careful what you wish for. and maybe it'll just show up.
So let me tell you about a couple things that have just been showing up in my reality, because I don't believe any of their propaganda, right? I rarely listen to news reports. I might scroll through some stuff. Obviously, I'm part of the news, so I have to kind of know what's going on. But I have very much limited any intake of both mainstream and alternative news because I just don't want it in my world, okay? So I don't believe their lies. And stuff is falling apart in front of me, and not in a bad way. And not everyone is seeing it, even other people that I'm with. So I'm going to give you guys a few examples. This is just the last week of my life, okay? And it's happened in multiple locations because, as I was telling you guys earlier, I went on a family trip and we went down to the Florida Keys. We were down there in the Keys, and then we went down to Key West. So it happened down there. And now I'm back in San Diego, which is where I live, and it's happening here too. So this are just some, examples of what's happening in my life and how reality is glitching. And I'm telling you this so you can be more aware, because I know I'm not the only person experiencing this. And it's real easy to overlook some of this stuff and be like, oh, I just must have forgot, or, oh, silly me. But real things are changing in real time, and you just, need to be aware of it. So for me, the first thing that I noticed is this happened when I was in Florida with my family, and we were having breakfast. And I noticed we were outside because it's just gorgeous down there. And I noticed there was this area that looked like it had just been like trimmed, like bushes and trees. It looked gorgeous. It looked like someone just trimmed it, took really good care of it. And I noticed it, and I looked away, and the next time I looked back, it looked as if like there were branches all over the place, like a gardener or someone had just trimmed it, but all the trimmings were still there. That is not what I saw the previous moment when I was admiring, because I was really looking at this and how beautiful it looked. So that's weird situation number one. And like I said, I was with my family and no one else noticed it. And my family is not necessarily awake and aware. So I don't need to give them another reason for them to think I'm crazy. So I didn't even say anything. The next thing happened. I went grocery shopping and I was looking for a very specific product. It's a breakfast food I was looking for. And my kids only eat certain things. So I have to be very careful. Get this, don't get this, right? So I was very careful of what I was putting in my cart, and I bought these breakfast sandwiches, and they were supposed to be cheese, egg, and sausage, because that's what my kids will eat. They will not eat bacon if it's in there. And so I looked at this box multiple times before putting it in my grocery cart, and it said cheese, egg, and sausage. And I get home, and it's cheese, egg, and bacon. I'm telling you, that is not what I put in my cart because I specifically looked for it. So that item completely changed in my reality. Third example. So both of those were down in Florida. The third example just happened to me yesterday. And I'm back here in San Diego, and I'm looking for one of my kids, my son, my middle son. And I'm kind of calling for him around the house. I can't find him anywhere. I go in his room. I look all around his room. He's nowhere in his room. I go outside because sometimes he's hanging out in the backyard. He's not in the backyard. I go in a couple other rooms of the house that, sometimes he hangs out in. He's not there. And I asked my husband, I'm like, have you seen our son? Where's he at? He's like, oh, I think he's in his room. And I'm like, I was just in his room. He's not in his room. But I thought, I'll just go back up. I go upstairs, open the door, and he's just laying on his bed. And I'm like, were you here just a little bit ago? Like, did you go into your closet? Were you under your bed for some reason? Because I came in and looked and he was not there. And he's like, no, Mom, I've been here for whatever, an extended period of time. I haven't moved. Now, normal people would look at these three situations and be like, I'm going crazy. But because I know that our reality is changing, I know that I'm not going crazy, even though other people might think that. But I'm telling you this so you can start to recognize this, because our realities are changing. It's like the Mandela effect, but for you personally. It's like your own little gift. So have fun with it. And be careful who you tell, because people are going to give you some really weird looks. All right, guys, that wraps up this episode of The Rundown. I appreciate you all listening. If you want more information about United Network News, who we are, what we do, visit our website, unitednetwork.earth, and consider becoming a member. That gives you instant access to all of the content we release, all of our news updates, anything we talk about the new Earth and restoration and where we're going, the complete GIA report, and of course our amazing field messenger reports. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.